What was behind Seattle's police chief resigning? What allegations were founded against a former Illinois state lawmaker? And just how much did California Governor Gavin Newsom have in Behested payments? Answers to those questions and so much more right now with The States, powered by the Center Square. It's Monday, August 3rd, 2026, and I'm your host, Greg Bishop.
I think there's a lot of information out there that can suggest to people the reasons why this decision was made. What I'm saying is that there were multiple factors. The events of Sunday certainly played into it, and I think we've discussed some of the gaps and lapses that happened. And again, my decision here is based on what I believe is going to be best for this department and for the city moving forward.
So about your process and how you're going to be working with the mayor here. It sounds like there's some concerns that.
Yes, I think the biggest thing is, first, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that Chief Barnes and I are friends. We will remain friends. I had the opportunity to come over with him from Wisconsin to our work that we did together. And then also my friend and colleague, Yvonne Underwood, that we've known for several years, had a role with me coming in here. I think this morning when I had a meeting with the mayor, some of the things that we're going to do as a police department is to be very proactive. If you look at some of my statistics from when I was in Beloit, Wisconsin, we were a very proactive police department, identifying the individuals that are causing the gun violence and the gang problems in that city. And we're going to identify them here in Seattle, and we're going to put an effort, a concerted effort, into identifying those individuals, making the appropriate arrests, and sending them over to King County Prosecutor's Office.
Now, that's some Seattle officials Friday after talking about communication breakdowns that left the public waiting for hours for information on a food festival shooting that left 3 dead the prior weekend, and how that was part of the variety of reasons that they had asked the former police chief, Sean Barnes, to resign. The Center Square Washington team has been on top of this story from the beginning, and to discuss that communication breakdown further, let's talk to the Center Square investigative reporter, TJ Martinell. TJ, the mayor there said that the breakdowns that occurred the weekend before last were unacceptable after the shooting at the Bite of Seattle Festival at the Seattle Center. What did you find out in text messages that seemed to really show that communication breakdown?
Yeah, so what happened is, as you know, the press conference was delayed by several hours, and there was disputes over who and what exactly was causing the delay. And attending the press conference along with the mayor was Governor Bob Ferguson, and rumors started to circulate, and there was accusations thrown around that he was the one who had it delayed so that he could be there for a photo op, even though he really didn't say a whole lot. So I filed a public records request the next day with his office to figure out what kind of communication he had with Katie Wilson. And within 2 days, I got text messages from the governor from that night where he's telling Katie Wilson he can be there at 9. The press conference didn't start until 10:45 p.m. And what it's really showing is, because she told him, you know, we're likely to have a press conference, which raises a lot of questions of the possibility that they wouldn't have even had one on top of it being delayed. So what the text messages indicate is that the governor was not the cause of the delay. And so that just raises additional questions that we're pursuing, which is, why was it delayed? Was it because of a lack of information? Was it because they found out information about the suspects that they didn't want released to the public or weren't sure? Was it because somebody told them, don't do anything until I get there? As you probably know, the police chief wasn't even in Seattle at the time. He wasn't even in Washington State. He was in Dallas for some convention. The former police chief doesn't even live in the state. He lives in Chicago. So there's all these things that are being brought to light. But these text messages just show a breakdown in communication between different elected officials.
Now, Wilson has said that, you know, she thought that they had the information going out, but later found that that wasn't the case. And if we just look at the timeline here of when these official statements were being made, of course, you know, social media posting at 6:30. Yeah, a lot of people can see that. And announcing that there was a mass casualty event, but they didn't have a news conference until 11 p.m. That's 5 hours almost of not really having much more information than what was posted on a social media post, let alone having the ability to answer any questions that members of the public and the press may have.
Yeah, and I think that there's two things to keep in mind. There's a difference between a media press availability press conference and a police briefing where the police could have come out on their own and provided details about the shooting. Most importantly, there was an active suspect on the loose that they had not apprehended. I don't even know if I don't think they've even been caught now. So you had a suspect on the loose, and people had no information in order to identify them and report them to the police. And so that's the biggest question, is why was the police not allowed to brief the public on information that they might have needed to know? Because this person, for all we know, this person has gone out and killed someone else. We don't know because there's the information hasn't, been made available. So that's the issue that's going on, is there was this complete breakdown in communication with the public, between public officials, elected officials, and it just shows that there's not many people are seeing this as a failure in leadership on a lot of levels, which is why we're seeing this fallout. And the fact that I got these text messages from the governor's office within 2 days, that's the fastest public records request response I've ever received. I got the text messages before I even got the acknowledgement letter.
Well, especially for text messages. I mean, and the images that you got from the governor's office weren't like a screenshot where you hit the buttons on your phone. They took a picture of the phone. To get you that statement. In a way, I mean, do you think that they moved quick to just be clear what happened here with the timeline?
I think that this is the governor sending a very clear message that this press conference was not delayed because of him, because he had previously told other media outlets that he gave a timeline to them that matches up with his text messages. So I think the governor's smart in the sense that he knows that this is a PR nightmare, and he's not the one who's going to fall. It kind of reminds me of the Maltese Falcon, the very end, for anybody who's seen it, where they're all getting together and trying to figure out who the fall guy is going to be. And clearly the governor's like, that's not going to be me. So far, it's been the former Chief Barnes, but we'll see how this is going to be a political fallout potentially for Katie Wilson, because it's also reflected on her. And this is, with all the press conferences she did recently, trying to put out these fires, but it just remains to be seen what's going to happen. But getting these text messages so quickly shows that we have an inside view of what kind of communication was going on with elected officials, but we also are getting an idea of who was and wasn't responsible for the delay. So that's something that we're obviously going to be continuing to pursue until we figure out what happened.
Well, and just an assessment as well of, listen, I mean, mass shooting takes place. You want to get as much information out there as possible. Seems to have been some more sentiments put towards, who all can we get to line up with us at this news conference for whatever kind of, press splash there may be, instead of just getting out there, like you said, with a police briefing with details about the suspect and where it's safe, where it's not safe, unanswered questions, and so forth. But to the former police chief, Sean Barnes here, you said he doesn't even live in the state. He lives in Chicago.
Neither does our intern police chief, who's a friend of his. He also lives in Illinois. Their primary residence. They have apartments or whatever. They have places where they live when they're in Seattle, but they are in the area. But that just raises another question of the mayor for Seattle has to live in Seattle. It's the whole concept of them being the mayor, is they're representing the city they live in. So this really raises another question, is should the police chief have to live in the city? And should they, because it becomes an out of sight, out of mind issue because they don't live there. So if things go wrong, it's not their direct problem. And I think a lot of people were shocked to discover that. It's like, wait a minute, he doesn't even live in the same time zone. I mean, what happens when something like this occurs?
Exactly right. Yeah, I mean, you got to think about it. He wasn't even there when this happened, so he couldn't necessarily oversee the response there on the ground. I'm sure he was on the phone quite a bit, but pretty remarkable that he doesn't even live in the state of Washington, let alone the city of Seattle. And was still making six figures plus. What was his salary?
He was making over $300,000 a year, and it's just been revealed that he got a severance package of over $700,000. So, I mean, we're going to be finding out how much time he spent out of the state during his tenure as police chief. We're going to find out how often this current interim chief has been out of the state as well, because this just even from putting the practicality aside, it's just a bad look. it's a bad look to have something like this happen and then finding out that the chief doesn't even live here. I think it wouldn't maybe change anything if he did live here, but he happened to be in Dallas for that convention. But it just looks bad. It gives off this impression of, oh, not my problem when I'm not there.
Well, and Katie Wilson, the Seattle mayor, this seems to be a real test to her capabilities, right? I mean, she's new to the office.
She's new to pretty much everything. For people who don't know, she has no prior political experience. She's never been the mayor of even a tiny town in some rural part of Washington. She's never held elected office before. She wasn't even, we know this for a fact, she wasn't even paying her own bills. Her dad was financially supporting her, and she's 40 years old and married. So one of the questions that has to be asked is why would anybody think that she would be able to respond well to something like this? What prior experience did she have where people looked at that and said, okay, that's the sign of somebody who's capable of leadership during a crisis? And it also raises additional questions. What happens when there's something that's even worse that happens? What if we have some sort of terrorist attack in Seattle, like something not on, God forbid, something on par with 9/11, but where you have to make drastic decisions very quickly. You have to be able to coordinate with people, and you have to communicate with the public and with other elected officials.
And you have to also consider, does your police chief live in the state, or is he going to be more concerned about what his family, half the country away is dealing with? Well, TJ, I know you and the team from Washington State are going to be on top of this and continuing pushing out stories, updating us about that. So people need to get the latest at thecentersquare.com and sign up for the Washington State's newsletter, free, again, at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more from the States.
We agreed that the totality of those unfounded items add to the narcissistic approach and careless regard for office shown by former Representative Benton. While they may be called unfounded, they are called unfounded because they either fell outside the statute of limitations for the LIG enabling statute, they were political in nature, or were not directly related to the allegations of sexual harassment.
That was Illinois Republican State Representative Jeff Kiker talking about a report from the Legislative Inspector General concerning sexual harassment and other allegations made against a former Democratic state legislator. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. Well, after months of investigation and leadership discussions, an internal report of a former Illinois state lawmaker released Friday, detailing sexual harassment allegations. However, the Center Square Illinois reporter Sean Reed reports one of the female complainants said the report has a number of factual inaccuracies. Now, following the unanimous vote from the Illinois Legislative Ethics Commission, which is a group of legislators made up of equal parts Republican and Democrat, they agreed unanimously to release the Legislative Inspector General report from Michael McCuskey's investigation into former State Representative Harry Benton. Now, a redacted version of the report released Friday shows complaints made against Benton and other communications about the investigation. Now, before they were made public Friday, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker was in front of the cameras.
Changes need to be made in the reporting processes, in the way that people are held accountable, in the timing of the release of reports about these sorts of things. It is deeply concerning to me, and I would be hyper frustrated if nothing changed as a result of what we've learned over the last couple of months.
Reporting on the issue had been coming out for months, but the official documents weren't released until Friday. And they do show an initial verbal complaint being made back in February by two unnamed lawmakers to House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch regarding potential misconduct by Benton. An official complaint was filed with the LIG, the Legislative Inspector General, on March 4th. And Welch said the report reaffirms his claim that his office acted in line with procedure. He said, quote, "The report reaffirms confidence that our office acted responsibly, following legal guidance, respecting the wishes of those who came forward, and taking decisive action as additional information established a pattern of misconduct." Now, Benton did not respond to a request for comment from the center square. The report provides a narrative account of Benton's actions, including claims and cooperation of the accounts from both named and unnamed witnesses of Benton acting indecently at different events. Much of the allegations against Benton are listed as unfounded claims due to a variety of factors, including a lack of evidence and being beyond a 1-year statute of limitations or outside the official scope of the investigation. Now, there are only 2 founded complaints in the report. The first complaint details Benton allegedly sexually harassed an unnamed district office director during an event at a bar in the capital city of Springfield. Here's more from Kiker, who again is a member of the Legislative Ethics Commission that voted unanimously to release the report.
I have a daughter who's 25 years old, and a great deal of anger set in when I read through some of what this young lady had to endure. I know that as a father, I would have been very upset and had a difficult time controlling myself. I'm disappointed that she had to endure as long as she did. As laid out in the report, it's very evident of what that timeline looked like. It's also indicated in the report what the Speaker's office did to respond, and that would be up to review for everybody looking at the report to further delve into that question.
Now, the second founded complaint in the report details an interaction at a Chicago bar between Benton, another male lawmaker, and a female lobbyist. Benton reportedly made a comment regarding his sexual prowess before asking the lobbyist if she wanted to leave the bar with him. The other unnamed male representative was asked if he would do anything about Benton's statements, to which he reportedly responded, quote, "What do you want me to do about it? He's always like this." Now, the answer was corroborated by the unnamed lawmaker in an interview with the inspector. And in conclusion, the report says, based on my investigation, the state representative Harry Benton has violated the state law by committing 2 separate acts of sexual harassment. The conclusion of the report went on to say the fact that these violations are only misdemeanors and may be considered minor crimes by some does not mean they should be ignored. Investigators say others might argue that these are merely talking crimes at most. Those arguments don't stand up in today's society. People should not be treated as mere objects to tolerate other people's verbal pleasure or jokes, the conclusion states. Now, in response to the report this week, the lobbyist disputed the narrative of the complaint and called into question the investigation's quality, saying that there are inaccuracies in the Legislative Inspector General's report that must be addressed, and that it is likely these errors stem from the fact the LIG did not record a one-on-one interview or take contemporaneous notes. Now, that lobbyist writing that in a letter responding to the commission's report, McCuskey, the commission report author, responded with a statement saying that they've never tried cases in the press, nor will they ever do so. They went on to say their judgments have never been attacked by an individual doubting their credibility. Being the Legislative Inspector General is a much different experience from being a federal or state judge, they said. They said they have nothing more to add. Now, Chicago Democratic State Representative Kelly Cassidy, she released a statement Friday and calling on Welch, the House Speaker, to publicly acknowledge wrongdoing and to apologize for his own reported misconduct toward a former intern who sought his help after Benton sexually harassed her. Cassidy also said Welch has provided a series of excuses, victim blaming, and failure to publicly acknowledge shortcomings. Now, Illinois House Minority Leader Tony McCombie, leader of the Republican minority, she said that there needs to be substantive changes at the Illinois State House.
House Republicans have introduced reform after reform, and House Democrats blocked them. If this scandal and the federal indictment of Representative Carol Ammons still isn't enough, what will it take? I believe Speaker Welch should resign. I believe Governor Pritzker should call for his resignation. And every House Democrat now has a choice. They can stand behind Speaker Welch, or they can stand for the integrity of the Illinois House, but they cannot do both.
And the governor was asked about his confidence in Welch as Speaker of the House. Here's what he had to say.
Well, it's not up to me to make the decision about who the Speaker of the House is. I didn't opine about it when he ran for it in the first place. I'm not going to opine about it now.
Meanwhile, Thursday, the House Special Investigating Committee, they meet to begin their work into assessing the federal charges brought against a separate legislator, Champaign Democratic State Representative Carol Ammons. She's charged with steering taxpayer-funded state contracts to nonprofits that were paying her daughter and for misusing campaign funds. She's pleaded not guilty. Her husband has also been charged in that case. He's the Champaign County Clerk. Be sure to subscribe to the Center Square newsletter to get the latest out of Illinois, free for you at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more. There's a lot of money in politics, and you can find a lot out by looking at campaign contributions, but some of the biggest checks in California politics never touched a campaign account. Most of them were written because California Governor Gavin Newsom asked for the money, totaling more than $340 million. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. Now, elected officials are increasingly taking advantage of state laws that allow them to solicit unlimited sums of money from large corporations, from unions, tribes, and other special interest groups, even when those donors are seeking governmental contracts or their involvement in government proceedings, so long as the money goes to a third party, such as the politician's favorite nonprofit. Now, joining us to discuss this further is the Center Square investigative reporter, Adam Herbets. Adam, what exactly are behested payments, and why should voters and taxpayers know about these?
Well, it's something for us to investigate with a three-pronged approach. First, we're looking at the official who's actually making the request, but then you have to look at who the donor is and who the recipient is. The politician is really just the middleman, and that's why this is a blank check system. You contribute to Gavin Newsom's campaign account, they're going to put a cap on that. But if you donate to his favorite nonprofit, it's unlimited. That's why it's disclosed in the state of California, but it's also legal and it's lightly regulated.
So talk a little bit about the legality of this. How are they, checked? What kind of accountability is there to ensure everything's above board? Because when you look at campaign contributions, it's pretty clear. Somebody put money into the campaign, and then the campaign funds a operation, or they pay an employee, or they buy media with it. How are the behested payments here tracked?
So in the state of California, there is a database, and I give the state some credit because they at least publish this information online for watchdog groups or journalists or an average citizen to look up. You can look it up by the official's last name. You could look it up by the donor or the recipient. But when I say you got to look at all three columns, the reason I say that is because this has really been in the news lately because the governor has solicited donations for his wife's nonprofit. That's probably been the biggest case in the news over the last few months. That's why the governor went on X and talked about how the federal government is placing him and his wife under federal investigation. But that's just one case involving several donors, but there are a lot more. There are thousands of payments that Newsom has solicited, and that's why I think, as far as I know, we're the only ones going through line by line, donor by donor, and trying to figure out what, if anything, the donor got in return.
So before we talk about the donors here, let's follow the money all the way to where it went. and over $300 million since 2019. Where exactly is this money going, and what kind of conflicts have you guys already found?
It depends. There are so many different causes and so many items in the budget that are unfunded that Governor Newsom has decided to, instead of trying to get it from taxpayer money, he's going to try and get it through philanthropy. Some people say that's a good use of not using taxpayer dollars. That's what the supporters say. They say, look, at the end of the day, a lot of this money is going to a good cause. For example, COVID relief or wildfire relief. When there's an emergency, Governor Newsom can get on the phone, or his staff can get on the phone, and they can call big corporations like Facebook or Blue Shield to try and say, hey, can you help us out here? The money may not be in our state budget, but we could use some of your money to help out with these disasters. So the supporters of this say it's all going to a good cause. The opponents of it say, but what is Blue Shield getting on the back end? What is Facebook getting on the back end? Because you got to look at all aspects of this. And when Facebook and Blue Shield and other big companies, tribes have business before the state government, it raises legitimate questions about conflicts of interest.
I mean, and you're not talking about a couple of $100,000 here that Facebook is giving in behested payments. You're talking about $32 million that Facebook has paid through this. You also have Blue Shield, $21 million, and Sierra Health, $14.9 million. Adam, this isn't peanuts here. We're talking these are millions and millions of dollars.
It's not chump change. And when you look at what Facebook or Blue Shield might be getting on the back end, that's when it starts to raise those questions further. Because after Blue Shield made one of its biggest payments, they got that $15 million no bid contract to administer the state's COVID-19 vaccine. So yeah, you're giving millions of dollars, but then after the fact, you're getting a $15 million no bid contract. That means no one is competing against you. Newsom and his administration chose you to be part of this. It's also important to note that Blue Shield has donated to Newsom's campaigns since 2002. So not only are they donating to him directly through the campaign system, but they're being able to donate way more money through this behested payment system.
So let's talk a little bit about the enforcement of this. Didn't Newsom just recently get fined some dollars for campaign contributions? What was going on there?
Yeah, so California has a Fair Political Practices Committee. I hesitate a little bit because it is a mouthful. It's one of those abbreviations that we often talk about here in the state of California. Basically, they are the Watergate era watchdog that was created in the 1970s to shine a light on political money. But here's what they do, and here's what they don't do. They don't talk or examine whether any of these behested payments are proper. They don't make any judgments about the conflicts of interest. They simply collect the information and they publish it online so that you can decide, so that journalists can report on it, so that watchdog groups can see what's going on and they can figure out what to do from there. Now, some of the information is collected but omitted from the website. That's going to be part of our story tomorrow. If you check thecentersquare.com, look out for that part of our story. But they are not doing anything to cast judgment on whether these payments are proper, even when there is state business at hand. What they are doing is making sure that the politicians are filling out the forms on time. They have 30 days to fill it out on time. Newsom has been fined repeatedly for not filling out the documents on time. He has not been fined for doing anything improper or for soliciting money from the wrong groups.
Something that at least I've heard a lot covering state governments on a very, on the ground fashion. And you watch all these things happen. You always hear, well, that's just how the sausage is made. Is this how it's done in California? And is this indicative of how politics are handled at a state house level?
I think it's indicative of how things could be being run throughout all 50 states. The difference with California is that we have a state website that at the very least tracks it. But the other 49 states, and I haven't gone through and dug through government databases for all 49, but as far as I know, I haven't found any other state in the union that has a database that tracks it at this level. Now, Also, there isn't any other politician who raises money at this level. The second highest politician on this list was Governor Jerry Brown. He has raised about 1/10 as much money as Gavin Newsom. So one of the reasons that this might not be being looked at quite the same level is because Governor Newsom's the first person in state history to take this system and run with it at this level. He's essentially supercharged it, and he understands that these are blank checks and he can raise an infinite amount of money if he's able to call up the right donors. One more thing I want to add.
Yeah, please.
If you or I were to call up Facebook, or you or I were to call up Blue Shield, the question I would ask, look, even if the money is going to a good cause, like the Red Cross or to wildfire relief, would they be donating that money if you or I asked?
It's a great question, and something I know that you and the team from the investigative unit with the Center Square are going to continue asking those tough questions. Adam Herbets, investigative reporter for the Center Square. As you said, be sure to go check out his latest work, as there will be more further developments on that story. We'll be right back with more from the States. How are markets reacting to last week's decision by the Federal Reserve to keep interest rates flat for the time being? And just how is that impacting you, the consumer? Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. For Everyday Economics this week, I talked with PhD economist Orphe Divounguy earlier this morning to push past the headlines and to delve deeper into what the Fed's decision last week means for your pocketbook. Orphe, the significance of last week's rate being held steady by the Federal Reserve. Listen, they've done this for 5 straight meetings, but what was different about this past week's vote?
Yeah, I think the lack of guidance. The new Fed chair does not really believe in the Fed telling markets what the Fed will do. The Fed chair wants markets learning to play the ball, not the referee. In other words, try to interpret the data and then decide what to do based on the data, as opposed to what the Fed is telling you the Fed could do in the future. But that creates a ton of confusion, right? The response, the market reaction was stocks falling 1,150 basis points on the day. The 30-year Treasury yield jumped to its highest since 2007. It means basically markets interpret that there's more inflation risk if the Fed is not really ready to react to what appears to be stubborn inflation.
Yeah, and you've got the 5 past meetings, them keeping rates flat, but the vote this past week, it seemed to send some signals. You had 3 on the board there that decided that they wanted to actually go not down, but up.
That's right. You mentioned the 3 dissents. That's the first time we've had 3 dissents in the same direction. Now you have, Beth Hammack of Cleveland Fed, Neil Kashkari of Minneapolis, and Lori Logan of Dallas, all opting for a rate hike. Well, why? Because inflation remains stubborn, because the labor market looks in okay condition at a 4.2% unemployment rate. And so, and Karen Walsh, talked about, a Fed that is going to respond to the data, and yet the Fed did nothing that the data really implied it should be doing right now. And so the market responded by basically implying that inflation could run hotter under this new Fed. So that's what we got last week. And that could be problematic ahead of this week's jobs report. It seems that the markets will respond and that volatility will increase in the absence of Fed guidance.
You write there's a couple of layers to answering the question of how we got here, right? Where the signals are indicating that we could possibly see interest rates go up before the end of the year. So talk about that kind of surface level headline layer of answering that question of how we got here, and then go into that deeper level of, the inflation concerns and what's going to be driving that.
Yeah, and I mean, we got inflation expectations have moved up a little bit. We got, we have basically a big demand for investment. The AI spending, that's a big factor that's going to continue to push interest rates higher. We also have lower, on the opposite side, we got lower population growth, right? And lower population growth will push interest rates lower. And so you have all these factors that are shifting that will have different impacts on what economists call the neutral rate. And so that's kind of the picture. But then you also have fiscal deficits. A fiscal deficit will push rates higher. So those are the factors that are at play here. And the combination of those factors basically imply that interest rates could have moved higher on net. And that's what we're likely going to see. Now, the Fed hasn't responded yet. I think there are different school of thoughts here. You have people at the Fed that believe that, interest rates could move lower. But I think the fact that we have more and more dissents and that more and more people are opting for higher interest rates tell you basically that more people at the Fed are starting to think that potentially interest rates, that Fed policy may not be restrictive enough. And so I happen to think it could be just barely restrictive. But ultimately what that means is cuts are completely off the table.
Now, you mentioned the jobs report expected later this week, and a lot of people are going to be watching that closely. How does last week's vote by the Fed to keep interest rates steady, how does that impact what we could see coming up Friday with that jobs report?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's the lack of guidance, right? No forward guidance, the Fed not telling us what it's going to do. No framework guidance, the Fed basically not telling us how it thinks about the data and how it reacts to the data. And all of that creates uncertainty, right? And that uncertainty will show up in higher volatility. In the absence of the Fed, a forward guidance and the absence of framework guidance, I think every number will hit much harder than it used to. A acceleration in wage growth will likely push yields much higher than they would have had the Fed basically guided markets and told markets how to think about the data and what it could do next, right? And that's what I'm looking for. I'm not really looking for the number itself, but the market reaction. I think, regardless of what that number is, expect larger volatility when those numbers hit on Friday.
Oh, and finally here, Orfe, how does this look for those in the jobs market, those looking to save for retirement? What's the bottom line for consumers?
Higher volatility is never good, right? Higher uncertainty keep businesses from hiring workers, right? If you don't know what's going to happen next, you kind of hold back, you sit tight, you hold on to your wallet, you sit on your wallet, you don't go out and make big purchases or new investments, big investments. And so higher volatility is never a good thing. For people sitting near retirement, the big stock market drop we got last week, yes, the stock market recovered, but the big drop is not a place where they want to be. It doesn't feel nice. You rather see your portfolio continue to climb right into your retirement years to finance your consumption, to pay your bills, essentially, right? And so higher volatility is never a good thing for long term, for people who are sitting, for households, people who are sitting on the sidelines hoping to get a job next week, for retirees or people close to retirement who don't have a lot of time left to save up and see their portfolio increase, right? And so that is what's at stake here. Really what we need is a Fed to come back with a reaction function, a Fed to guide markets and tell them this is exactly how we will respond based on the economic data. And I think this Fed chair just hasn't done that quite yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. What he could do to help the markets, he's saying, no, I want the markets to just look at the numbers themselves and interpret it. It's a fascinating dynamic. And
the markets really need to know how the Fed also interprets those numbers. That, no forward guidance is one thing, but a reaction function, some clarity as to how the Fed reacts to the numbers or should react to the numbers is important, and that's missing. It's that concept of framework guidance that Warsh has been talking about. Unfortunately, he hasn't been forthcoming yet about what that actually looks like.
Well, it's just some of the valuable insight you get here with Everyday Economics. So be sure to subscribe for more here from the Center Square. I'm Greg Bishop. Dr. Orphe Divounguy, greatly appreciate your time as always. Welcome back to the States. It's now time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country that you can find in the description below or in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter, free at thecentersquare.com. Arizona and Nevada on Friday opposed a Colorado River usage reduction plan by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, which could define the crucial waterway for 40 million people over the next decade. The Center Square contributor Liam Hibbert reports the Colorado River Final Environmental Impact Statement by the Bureau of Reclamation and the U.S. Department of Interior emphasized the federal government's preference for negotiations to take place among states, but set in motion plans for the next decade of water conservation. Now, the proposal, which was released Friday, included up to 3 million acre-feet in annual lower basin water usage reductions. Negotiations among Colorado River states have repeatedly failed to meet deadlines over the past year, leading at least 4 states, including Arizona, to build legal teams for potential litigation over the river's water sharing. Now, the Colorado River states are California, Nevada, and Arizona in the lower basin, and then Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico in the upper basin. U.S. Representative Rich McCormick, he wants to bar anyone who refuses to testify before Congress from ever working for the government. The Georgia Republican said the appearance of Dr. Anthony Fauci, former director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, led him to revive his bill, which was first introduced in 2024. Now, Fauci appeared before a U.S. Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs and said he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights to protect against self-incrimination, invoking that Fifth Amendment over 110 times. Now, that committee subpoenaed Fauci, given full and unconditional pardon with no investigations happening by then President Joe Biden in January 2024, extended through January 1st, 2014, all to testify about his role during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the Center Square Associate Editor Kim Jarrett reports McCormick's bill, called Stop the Swamp, it allows Congress to refer uncooperative witnesses to the U.S. Department of Justice. Federal law already makes lying to Congress a crime, but McCormick's bill would add additional consequences for federal employees who refuse to testify. Louisiana retailers can no longer charge consumers extra for using debit cards under a new state law that took effect Saturday, giving consumers new legal protections and expanding the Attorney General's authority to enforce that ban. The Center Square Louisiana editor Misty Castile reports Senate Bill 254. It prohibits retail businesses from imposing a surcharge on customers who pay with a debit card instead of cash, check, credit card, or another form of payment. Now, the law defines a surcharge as any additional amount charged by a retail business that increases the cost of a transaction for the privilege of using a debit card. It does not apply to credit card transactions. Consumers who are assessed an unlawful debit card surcharge, they may recover actual damages from the retailer. Before filing a lawsuit, however, the customer must provide written notice of the alleged violation. If the business reimburses the surcharge and cures the violation within 30 days of receiving notice, the customer may not pursue legal action. Now, the law limits private lawsuits to willful violations, repeated violations, or violations that are not corrected within that 30-day cure period. And 31 states have opted into the Federal Education Freedom Scholarship Program, while 19 states and Washington, D.C. have not done so, ahead of the January 2027 deadline. Now, the Trump administration launched the School Choice Initiative in 2025 through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. This created a federal income tax credit of up to $1,700 annually for individuals who donate to certified scholarship granting organizations. SGOs would then distribute funds to families for education expenses, including tuition, tutoring, curriculum, and instructional materials. The Center Square Education reporter Esther Wickham reports U.S. Secretary of Education Linda McMahon and others may support the School Choice Initiative, and they've said that these programs place parents back in the driver's seat of their child's education, providing more flexibility and options for the family. And while school choice has drawn bipartisan support in some areas, several Democrat-led states, including Pennsylvania and Illinois, have not joined that program. And that's just some of what America is talking about. Get these and other headlines at thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. And join us back here Tuesday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from all around the country, only with The States, powered by the Center Square.